Well, I'm back again, and now we go on to our next session, which is a further discussion around how we can reduce embodied carbon through innovation in construction materials. And in particular, we're focusing on the journey to net zero for construction materials, and we're interested in what each individual sector are doing to sort of make progress in the area. And we've got a excellent and very diverse panel in terms of the sectors which they're representing, and in no particular order. We have Kirsten McCarthy, Head of Sustainability of Aggregate Industries. Kirsten's responsible for driving forward the company's ambitions to become a leading sustainable business and net zero company. And given the diversity of products that aggregate industries deal with, that's, I imagine, quite a challenge. Andrew Carpenter is the Chief Executive of the Structural Timber Association, and for 40 years Andrew has played an active part in the construction industry across a range of fronts, focused on business development, best practice, and the sector's improvement agenda, which he is very active in. And he's now, as part of the Structural Timber Association, the centre of the offsite construction agenda, whilst also promoting the capability and capacity of structural timber products. Claire Ackerman is director of the Concrete Centre, and in addition to that role, she is active with the Green Construction Board's Low Carbon Concrete Group, has joined the CPA Sustainability Group, and is part of a working group with the Global Cement and Concrete Association, which I can imagine has a massive responsibility given the extent of emissions that cement is responsible for. So huge leverage there, Claire, to make a difference. And finally, Neil Tilley, Senior Technical Sales Engineer and Business Development Manager for ArcelorMittal. Neil's an experienced engineer and manager with knowledge and skills of most construction materials, of steel, and also disruptive technologies. So I'm interested in following up on that one a little bit, Neil. So as before, we're going to ask each of our sort of presenters to give us 3 or 4 sort of thoughts in terms of what the issues are associated with that low carbon route map for their sector, and then we'll get into a Q&A. And I'm going to suggest that we start with let's start with Claire first.
Thank you, Simon. So my first point is save carbon now. At the Concrete Centre, we provide guidance on using low carbon concretes, which Veronica previously covered comprehensively in the earlier session, but also how to design more material efficiently and to use less materials. So that would be kind of point number 1. I think point number 2 is the importance of data, carbon measurement and benchmarking. As you mentioned, I was involved in the Green Construction Board's Low Carbon Concrete Route Map, as well as being part of the UK Concrete Sustainability Group, which published the MPA's own sector roadmap to decarbonise. And if you're not measuring carbon, and unless you know where your emissions are, then you can't reduce them. And that's obviously the first step to decarbonise. I think my third point is collaboration. To reach net zero, to decarbonise, we need technology to change, behavioural change, and also regulatory change. And to do that, we need to collaborate both with government, clients, supply chain. It's not just on the cement and concrete manufacturers to reach net zero. We need to do this for the built environment. So those would be the three key areas, Chair.
Brilliant, and very clearly stated as well. Andrew, I'll pass over to you next.
Yeah, fine. Thank you, Simon. Very pleased to be here. So my 3 points to kick us off. I mean, firstly, it goes without saying that timber is already a low embodied carbon material, and we are keen to see legislation that limits embodied carbon in buildings. So we're delighted that the government has set up a timbering construction working group, which they've invited me to sit on, to safely increase the amount of timber in construction. So we're delighted that the government has acknowledged that we need to increase the amount of timber we use. Like Claire, I believe that we need to get the calculation in place. There appear to be a myriad of carbon calculators out there at the moment. So we would like to see us coalesce around one carbon calculator and we'd like to see the government invest in it so that it's updated regularly, and we can compare eggs with eggs, apples with apples, pears with pears, whichever you wish to use. So that's the first point. The second point, because timber is a low embodied carbon material, we are now concentrating on our operations and transportation with EPDs, and we recognise that we are behind the curve on this. I'm very fortunate that I sit on the CLC Construct Zero board, and therefore we're using the CLC's 9 metrics and 28 milestones as a benchmark to get us underway, bearing in mind that most of our members are SMEs and may need help with that. And then the third point, which again Claire has made, is around productivity and the efficient use of materials, particularly we think in design, which has got to come through early involvement. And I think as the economy is entering what's likely to be a rocky period, productivity, efficiency is going to be even more important. So the benefits of modern methods of construction, added value and pre-manufactured value, I think are going to be key. So those are my 3 points, Simon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. If I hand over to Kirsten, your thoughts on this?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks again for having us here today. It's my pleasure to be here. I thought, rather than just jumping into the 3 points, which I hate to also repeat perhaps what's already been said, I thought it might be a good starting point just to explain a little bit about aggregate industries, just in terms of our range of products. So with it, you've already mentioned earlier that it is a big challenge for us given the range of products that we supply into the market. So I thought I'd just mention them briefly. So we supply aggregates to the market, cement, ready mixed concrete, and Veronica's my colleague who just gave a very good overview of what we're doing in this space. Asphalt and surfacing solutions business. We also have a precast and concrete products business. So we've got a vast array of products. And I think we firstly have to acknowledge that we have a real challenge on our hands to decarbonise. And in terms of the overall impact for our business, cement makes up 70% of our entire carbon footprint, but actually it's only a small turnover in terms of our sales. So we've got a real focus on cement clearly. In terms of the 3 points, again, I don't necessarily want to repeat, but data and measurement is really important. And actually, I stepped into the role aggregate industries a year ago, just recently. And I come from a completely different industry background, so no construction industry knowledge at all. Previous background was aviation, and I was really surprised on the inconsistency in terms of carbon calculation and data. So that was something that we addressed and need to continue to address more collaboratively and standardise across our industry. The second point is around the solutions already exist. So we already have low carbon solutions, which Veronica's already mentioned in terms of ready mixed concrete, and we need to continue in that vein, but we need to encourage the adoption of those low carbon solutions, and that's across all of our product ranges. So that's an area of focus for us, and how we do that comes on to the other points that have been made around regulatory change and working in collaboration. And my last point is on technology. And really having tried and tested technology that's investable so that we can invest in our business to decarbonise. I mentioned cement being the biggest challenge for us in terms of its impact, but it's also the biggest challenge in terms of investment. There are some technological solutions already available, but we need to get that investment and that confidence that we can really progress in this space. So those are my points. Sorry if I've repeated a little bit, but...
No, I think building a pattern would be the way we'd describe that. And finally, Neil, if you would like to add your perspective from the steel industry side.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. And the points I'd like to make from the steel perspective is that the embodied carbon in steel and steel products is understood, and therefore the carbon used in its production can be removed, and we will in time see zero carbon steel as the norm. And there's 3 current production methods. Blast furnace, which accounts for about 2/3 of global production, uses primary materials, those being iron ore, coal, limestone, and has an embodied carbon of about 2.5 tons per ton of steel produced. Another process is direct reduced iron, also uses primary materials as an embodied, and has an embodied carbon of about half that of blast furnace when natural gas is used in place of coal. And then finally, we have electric arc furnace, EAF, steel, which uses up to 100% scrap and has an embodied carbon about 550 kilograms of CO2 per ton of steel produced. So there's a wide range of embodied carbon in steel products before we even start to talk about decarbonisation, and that's something that architects and engineers need to grapple with. Interestingly, though, the reduction process in DRI can use hydrogen, and therefore that is a significant route to decarbonisation, and will basically involve the transition from blast furnace production to DRI production in tandem with electric arc furnace. This transition will take time and investment, but we anticipate that our first plants to achieve this will be in production in about 2024, 2025, as hydrogen and green energy become more readily available. Several steel manufacturers have produced routes to zero carbon with varying degrees of detail, and I think it's in that detail that the devil lays. For example, a route map to zero carbon that relies predominantly on carbon capture on storage should be questioned. However, a technically robust roadmap that relies on a little bit of offsetting at the end, if you like, could be seen as acceptable. And I think the final point I'd make from the steel perspective is that it's vitally important that architects, engineers and contractors understand how materials are produced. They understand their local supply chain, and they're armed with the knowledge of how to execute smart design and smart purchasing. Key to that, in my view, is that if they are in any way unsure about the details they have, or if they see any lack of transparency, that they have the confidence and the tenacity to challenge material suppliers, and if needed, make tough choices on who they choose for suppliers.
Excellent, Neil. Thank you very much. Now, whilst waiting for some questions to come in, I just want to start off with a question that actually takes us back to a previous session where we were talking about some of the potential impacts around regulation. And given that there is not really a regulatory framework for the reduction of embodied carbon, which is what this session's about, I'd just like your views on the kind of confidence that your sector has in making the investments that you're having to make ahead of that kind of regulatory incentive. So is the demand from the clients there? If I start with, who am I going to start with first? I think I'm actually going to start with Kirsten, given that you've got the widest range of products and you seem to have the biggest challenge at reducing carbon from the smallest element of your turnover. So tell us about the confidence that you have in making the kind of investments you need that you're making at the moment.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So clearly, we set out our new sustainability strategy, and we want to be leaders in supplying the market for sustainable products and solutions. So in order to do that, we can't wait with these investments. We have to start working now. There is a real challenge. And although the answer isn't there overnight for us, we need to start making progress and making these investments. So we actually believe that there is a commercial benefit in making these investments to position ourselves to be leading in this space. And then we believe that regulatory environment will eventually catch up. So the government has legislated to be net zero by 2050. They are introducing slowly, but consultations and policies around this. So we're starting to see some movement in this space. And we believe the time to invest is now. We can't wait. And I say we want to be leaders. So we are confident, and we've invested a significant amount, in particular for our cement plant at Calden. We've recently invested £13 million in a chlorine bypass system that will increase our throughput of alternative fuels, which effectively reduce our reliance on coal, which reduces then the embodied carbon within our cement production. So these investments are significant. And they are happening now, and we believe we can't wait any longer.
Yeah, and Neil, I'm going to come to you, and I'm going to give it a little bit of a twist, which is one of obviously, ArcelorMittal operate lots of different countries. So as well as having that confidence that clients are interested in that, is there sort of like a geographical dimension as well? So are there locations where you have greater confidence in making these investments? Is the UK a good place to focus at the moment?
I think in terms of regions, they sort of come out through our approach to Paris, where our targets for Europe have, in terms of reduction in carbon, have increased from 30 to 35%. But our target by 2030, but our target for 2030 for the whole of ArcelorMittal is 25%, both backed up with zero by 2050. So being such a global country, we see that Europe probably has the edge, and in terms of its ability to decarbonise. I agree with the previous speaker that if you've not started your decarbonising activities, I think you're going to be struggling to catch up. And we have 5 or 6 on the go at the moment, which is why we can make claims for 24, 25. And each of these facilities is taking about £1 billion of investment. So it's vitally important that wherever we are in the world, where we are trying to decarbonise, that we have the buy-in and the support of local and regional governments to help us do that. And from a UK perspective, I would very much support legislation that identifies and starts to make mandatory embodied carbon levels in certain building types.
Okay, thank you. Now, Claire, you're seeing this to some extent from the outside as well, because you're members of, say, for example, the Green Construction Board and such like. So do you see enough movement with industry bodies and everything else to give you the confidence that the industry that you represent is making the right kind of investments at the right time?
I think there's a couple of points. I think the first one is there's lots that we can measure carbon now. We can set benchmarks at a client level. We can do a huge amount that sort of is on the procurement side. And a key part of that low carbon route map was the guidance on how a client can do benchmarking and how they can set targets in procurement to reduce their carbon. So I don't see that we necessarily have to wait for government to give us an upper bound or anything like that. The clients know the materials that they consume, and they can analyse that, and they can reduce their footprint with the supply chain. I suppose the point with regards to kind of investment is obviously how do you accelerate innovation, and some of that is on the standard side. How can we encourage the concrete standards to keep pace with innovations in materials, and the low carbon concrete group is looking at that and looking to see if there's a path that could potentially be technology agnostic and encourage new innovations. But there is obviously climate change is a global issue, and carbon measurement and carbon pricing probably more of a cement issue. So not an area I'm an expert, but what you don't want is carbon leakage. You don't want to be importing carbon problems and reducing the security of supply on having local materials.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
So don't wait for regulation would be my headline.
Right. And Andrew, I'm going to wrap up this particular bit with your sector is slightly different in that actually you're trying to persuade them not that timber is a sustainable solution, but it's a solution that meets their needs from a wider perspective. And I mean, clearly there's an awful lot of momentum behind that now. So how is the low carbon agenda supporting the structural timber industry in that respect?
Okay, I mean, first to say, Simon, we're in a great spot. I mean, I'm 45 years in the construction sector, and this is the most exciting moment of my working life. To quote, the opportunity of a lifetime has to be grasped in the lifetime of the opportunity. and that opportunity is definitely now for the timber sector. And we're seeing that really on two fronts. First of all, the current mood music, consumer demand. I was down at MIPIN in Cannes, 3 months ago, met the chairman of Argent, who said that young people now who are buying houses are now asking what material they're made of because they're interested in the carbon agenda. We've got the ESG agenda, which is creating demand. We've already talked about Part Z in your previous piece. And also we've got investment, because we're now seeing the big developers like Barratt's, like Countryside, and so on, buying up my timber frame members because they want to move to a timber frame solution, knowing it's got to be the way forward to meet the net zero target. So it's a really exciting place to be, Simon. And I would say that the industry is supporting us full steam ahead. As I say, the setting up of the government timber and construction working group to increase the amount of timber we use. On the back of that, the RIBA are doing something similar because their members are coming to us, left, right, and centre, wanting to use timber for the first time. So really exciting place to be. I'm loving it. I'm not going to retire yet.
Excellent. No, we wouldn't want that to happen. Now, we've got a couple of questions that have come in from the audience. So, firstly, Phil Arrowsmith is interested in the panel's thoughts on a national low carbon materials register that would bring together testing and certification. And Claire, I think this is one that you're pretty well positioned to deal with, given your role on various panels.
Yeah, my understanding is that the role of the built environment carbon database is to do exactly that, in the fact that what it wants to do is make sure that there's a database that people can understand and access product EPDs, so they can understand the carbon impacts of the products they're using, but also they're looking at having a project level element of that built environment carbon database, so that they can get LCA, so whole life carbon assessments into that database. The key thing is obviously you can create that database, but people need to be generating the data, and I think there needs to be more incentives for doing LCAs at project level. I think, as Andrew mentioned earlier, Construct Zero encourages people to get EPDs in their project ranges, and I think that's happening. But I still think there's a big gap in having LCA understanding, so people understand where the carbon is in their projects.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And Neil, I've got a follow-up question from your articulation of the role of direct reducted and electric arc furnace produced steel. And this is from Daniel Ditchery, who is in the rail industry. And this is quite focused, so I suggest we deal with this one quite quickly if we can, which is he asking a question about whether those two products are suitable for weld rail applications. And this is because currently Network Rail standards wouldn't allow this. So a bit of a big step for decarbonisation. So any insights on that, and perhaps a broader perspective on the role of standards in perhaps holding back the use of some of these low carbon steels?
Yeah, I mean, in the instance that Daniel mentioned, that Network Rail do favour rail that's made by the blast furnace route. I think it's you have to understand, I guess, the processes. DRI is a primary material route, so it does use iron ore and will use hydrogen as we decarbonise. The electric arc furnace is just a vessel that you melt something that's solid. So you could have 100% DRI going into an EAF. Sorry about the overload of acronyms. Because the DRI actually produces a solid iron rather than a liquid iron. So that route, I would suggest, would be perfectly acceptable for somebody who is trying to transition from a high carbon BOS product to a low carbon product by a different route.
Okay, thank you. And I've got a question from Tia Thomas Alexander, which is, I think it's a brilliant question actually, because it picks up some of the challenges that there are in the wider commodities movements, and whether there's almost like that short-term distraction that takes us away from meeting some of these long-term carbon goals. And the question is almost that of how is the industry making decisions around long-term investment in sustainability when there is such a scramble for raw materials around the world. And I'm not sure how. I think I'm going to first probably go for Kirsten on that one. And you're going to tell me there's no conflict whatsoever. But if you can give us a few examples of actually how life has been made a bit difficult by, the current commodity super cycle, that would be great.
I mean, I think there is a conflict actually, and I think that is a challenge for us, and I think we have to be open and honest about that. And when we set out to deliver our sustainability strategy within aggregate industries, we've got a clear focus that we want to increase the amount of waste and recycled materials that we use in our products. So my answer to this is how do we prioritise? Well, we really need to focus on reusing waste recycled materials, and we're just in the process of creating a mapping out what that looks like in terms of our circular economy strategy, with a big focus on construction and demolition waste, because we think this is a big opportunity where we can reuse this material within our products. Then we have to use less materials in there in the first place in terms of primary aggregates, for example. So this is a big focus for aggregate industries. We've set out in our strategy that we want to grow from about 1 million tonnes of recycled material that we use in our products a year to 3.5 million tonnes by 2025. So that is a big challenge for us. Just to give you an example of, I guess, a challenge that we have overcome, and by describing one of our products. One of my favourite products actually is within the asphalt part of our business, and it's called Foam Mix. And we are within the asphalt products Foam Mix, we effectively plane existing roads and reuse all of that material in a process on site, so we're limiting logistics and transportation at the same time, and effectively relay that material that's been stripped up from the road. So there are already solutions there, and it's a real key focus for aggregate industries about reusing recycled material, and we very much see that as part of the future of our business.
Okay, and that again, I think is a really great illustration, particularly say, for example, asphalt, where there is a bit of a bitumen availability problem now. So that's great. Now, Claire, I think from a point of view of, it's not just materials, is it? There's other resources as well, and I think you've got a perspective on net zero fuels and whether there's a scarcity issue there.
Yeah, I think when we look at fuel switching to hydrogen away from fossil fuels, obviously steel and cement are known as being energy intensive industries, but there's also an element of drying the glues for engineered timber. So all manufacturing requires energy, and there is definitely still an understanding of how we're going to get the hydrogen infrastructure if we go down the hydrogen route for fuels, competition for biomass fuels. So I think it's not just material scarcity. There's a huge amount of innovation, as you mentioned before, in calcined clays and waste from the brick process. There's lots of material flows that come in, but I think the key thing really is the fuels needed to decarbonise manufacture.
And just to follow up on that, and I know this is probably not a fair question for somebody representing manufacturers, but now that we've got wholesale energy costs are 3 times higher than they were a year ago, do you think is that actually a positive for the net carbon agenda, in that it's going to accelerate investments in transition away, or is it going to hold things back because people aren't making the profits they need to be able to invest?
I think anything that changes a market quickly is going to encourage different behaviour, and I think you'd hope to see that. I know that one of the things that some of our kind of concrete plants are quite keen is to see changes in planning so that they can maybe use the benefit of on-site renewables. At the moment, it's not that easy to pop an onshore wind farm into a concrete plant, and actually a concrete plant would be a really great place to do that. So I think there's definitely is innovation and things that could be done. It's just enabling that throughout the planning process.
Yeah. Okay. Now, Andrew, I think you've got a broader perspective, which comes from the industry innovation agenda in connection with your work with constructing excellence. So
If I may, Simon,
please
if I
come
could
in on that.
just thank you. If I could just take my STA hat off for a few seconds and put my constructing excellence hat on. I really think it's when the chips are down, which is we're moving into that arena now, is when leadership really comes into play. Now, you know, Simon, that Constructing Excellence has been working on the value toolkit around the UK. And this to me is where the leaders now really determine what constitutes value. Are they going to stick firm to their values of the environmental issues, or are they going to buckle? We have seen it happen in construction terms over the years where clients have initially held out for certain value requirements, and then when the quotes come in, they all get put in the drawer and forgotten about. So I think we're moving into that situation now whereby we need to see strong leadership to see this agenda maintained, because we need desperately as a society, but as you know, as the earth needs this leadership in construction, because we're responsible for 40% of the emissions. I just make a plea to any clients in the audience to hold firm in terms of what they think is valuable. Thank you.
Okay, Andrew, I think that's a really, really good point. Now, I'm just going to thanks everybody who's put the questions in the Q&A. I think I hope that Tia Thomas feels that they got their money's worth on that one. So if anybody else wants to have a go, please do. In the meantime, I'm just reflecting on the kind of discussion we've had over the last 10 minutes or so, and we've talked very much about embodied carbon in the basic manufacturing process, say for example steel or the manufactured cement, and but we haven't talked very much about the distribution side of the industry. And I imagine aggregate industries, your transportation costs must be absolutely enormous. So what's going on from a point of view of distribution and logistics to sort of take the carbon out of that? Is that a priority, or is that a second order issue?
It is a priority for us. And I think actually talking about crisis and commodity issues that we've had, because we've had transport and logistics challenges, as well as many other challenges over this last kind of 2 years, that has allowed us to focus even more so on what for us in terms of transport and logistics is our scope 3 emissions. So it is a real focus for us, and we have a scope 3 target to reduce the carbon intensity of the delivery process. But what we've also done more recently is invested in a carbon calculator tool. I know we said we've got lots of these, but we've invested in one that we've developed that will actually map out the actual transportation, because we supply ourselves effectively with our products. Around 50% of our supply goes to each of the different product lines. We've got a good control in terms of oversight, and this carbon calculator tool has allowed us to now see the distribution from, say, one quarry to a concrete plant, and allowed us to see it really more transparently, which has given us a fresh new opportunity to actually question some of those decisions, some of which are commercially driven. But we've now got the data to actually challenge that, to say, actually, why is this journey from here to here when we can deliver more locally, or even use different suppliers? So it's quite a challenging. The tool has allowed us to have more transparency over that, and we're having some real tough, challenging discussions from a commercial perspective internally to focus really on this decarbonisation of transport and logistics. Above that, we are also investing in electrification. So we're working with our HME partners, and we're working with we've signed a number of NDAs with logistics companies to work on electrification for our fleet, particularly in the ready mix and concrete. But also we are working to electrify as much as possible, not just our transportation, but all of our assets and fleet, because going back to the energy scarcity and the issues around energy costs increasing, if we can electrify as much as we possibly can and then switch to a renewable energy, preferably off-site, then we get that additional resilience and again reduce costs. So it's a big focus for us at the moment.
Okay, right. I'm just gonna. I think we've got about 4 minutes. So unless anybody's got a question in the audience, I'm going to give you a minute each to reflect on issues of scarcity. And I think Neil summed it up rather neatly around talking about sort of the issues of hydrogen in the production of steel. There's not very much of it. So so I have to say, from my perspective, in terms of my work at Arcadis, I am quite concerned that demand is going to outstrip supply of key materials, sort of like cross-laminated timber, low-carbon cement, GBBS. So, if you're a client or a designer and you're setting out your sort of commitments to your investors and everybody else over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, can you genuinely be confident from each of your sectors that you represent that they will be able to meet those expectations, or is there a risk actually that you won't be able to meet that demand as it increases? So I'll give you a rest for a moment, Kirsten, and I'll go straight to Andrew, I think, on that one.
Okay, well, I actually thought this question might be coming up, Simon, so I did check with some of my colleagues. And the view from my board is that actually scarcity in human resources is going to be a bigger problem than actually materials. My members have been asking this same question of our supply chain. So I had lunch with the head of Swedish Wood last week, and he actually told me that in March he delivered 3 times the amount of raw material into the UK than is normal. So his words to me that there's no problem on materials, Andrew. And if you realise that in the last goodness knows how many generations, for every tree we've been cutting down, we've been planting 5. The message I've got on materials is that it's safe to continue specifying timber. But as I say, we have an issue around human resource throughout the supply chain at the moment.
Thank you very much. Perhaps Neil, the ability, this is perhaps more the ability of the industry to scale up this new kind of production. So you highlighted that ArcelorMittal have made some really big long-term investments in low carbon steel production.
Yeah, sure.
Is that
I think
happening elsewhere in the supply chain?
I think if you take Ukraine out of the equation, then I think there should be no problem with sourcing steel products. In our transition from or in the industry's transition from Boss steel making, it will be a case of, for example, and what we're doing at our mills is where we've got 2 Boss furnaces, we will decommission one and replace it with an EAF DRI type facility. So the actual amount of steel that's being produced won't diminish. It will be a transition. So I don't see it. I don't see there being an effect on material supply at all, really. I think obviously the if somebody is chasing for low carbon steel, then I think they have the alternative to make those choices for certain materials, but that requires them certain types of steel materials. That requires them to have an understanding of how steel is made, which is why I think it's one of the most important factors for construction to decarbonise, that people understand the manufacturing processes.
Right. Well, sadly we're running out of time. So Claire and the brain's gone dead for a moment. Is they're going to be freed from that one. So I'd just like to thank all of the panel for, I think, what has been a great session. So Kirsten, Andrew, Claire, and Neil, thank you very much. We're now going to be going for our final session, which is focusing on the issue of plant and transport. So we're going to be talking about alternative fuel trials to cut the use of diesel across the HS2 construction sites, and that will be presented by Neil Watt, who's Head of Environmental Sciences of HS2, and Daniel Marsh, who's Programme Manager of the Centre of Low Emission Construction. So I'll be joining you in the other place in about a couple of minutes. So thank you very much.